The world of hip-hop and entertainment has been rocked by a shocking revelation that no one saw coming. Diddy, once hailed as the king of hip-hop moguls, now finds himself at the center of a scandal so explosive it's threatening to unravel. Everything he's built, from his public persona as a business tycoon to his image as a philanthropist, everything is now on the line as the most damning evidence against him comes to light. What are the secrets Diddy's been hiding for years? What explosive revelations are about to shatter the image of the man we thought we knew? From financial misdeeds to explosive personal betrayals. The evidence against him is so startling, fans and insiders are left speechless. This isn't just another rumor, it's a full-blown scandal with real legal consequences. As the truth slowly leaks out, emotions are running high and the stakes have never been higher. And the best part? This is just the beginning. You won't believe what's about to unfold. What will Diddy do when his empire is at risk? Will the truth tear apart his family, his business, and his relationships? Stick around as we break down the shocking evidence and how it's all gonna change everything you thought you knew about Diddy. Stay tuned, because the drama is just getting started. The unraveling began quietly, like a thread slowly coming undone. For years, Diddy had maintained his image as the epitome of success, his wealth, his influence, his ability to control every narrative that came his way. From being the mastermind behind Bad Boy Records to owning multiple businesses and even dabbling in fashion and alcohol, Diddy was the face of hip-hop royalty. But behind the curtain, there were whispers, rumors about shady deals, unsavory actions, and financial maneuverings that didn't quite add up. It wasn't until a shocking leak surfaced that everything began to explode. The evidence was undeniable. Documents, emails, and financial statements showing a pattern of deliberate deception, corruption, and manipulation. For fans who had adored him, it was a gut punch. They had trusted him, supported him, celebrated his rise to power, but now they were questioning everything. It started with an anonymous tip. A whistleblower, someone who had worked closely with Diddy, had gathered a series of incriminating documents. It wasn't just about money, though the financial irregularities were damning enough. No, this was deeper, much deeper. The tip-off was a mix of business and personal, of fame and betrayal. And the world was about to get a front row seat to Diddy's darkest secrets. The first piece of evidence that came to light was a set of financial records that showed a pattern of suspicious transactions. These weren't small amounts. These were millions of dollars funneled through offshore accounts, shell companies, and mysterious bank transfers. The records, which had been buried under layers of red tape for years, showed that Diddy had been involved in a series of deals that seemed too good to be true. Deals that didn't just involve music, but international ventures that were riddled with controversy. The first reaction from the public was disbelief. Diddy, the mogul, the business genius. How could this be? This can't be true, said one of his former collaborators. Diddy built this empire from the ground up. He's the king of hip-hop. There's no way he's involved in something this shady. But the more the evidence mounted, the more undeniable it became. And then came the second shock, the personal betrayal. Leaked text messages and phone calls revealed an entirely different side of Diddy's relationships. They showed how he had manipulated those closest to him, his friends, his family, even the people he worked with. There were discussions of controlling behavior, gaslighting, and breaking trust for his own gain. The most startling revelation was a series of conversations between Diddy and several close associates about using personal information against people he had once called allies. It was a chilling look into a man who had carefully curated a persona of kindness and loyalty, but was now being revealed as a ruthless manipulator. In one of the leaked conversations, Diddy's voice could be heard on an old phone recording, speaking to a business partner about silencing someone who had threatened to expose him. We can't let them breathe. We need to control the narrative, control the message, or everything we've built is going to collapse. You know what to do, Diddy said, his voice cold and calculated. The tone of the conversations made it clear. Diddy was no longer the charismatic, lovable figure people had grown to admire. He was now a man desperate to protect his empire at any cost, willing to go to any length to keep his secrets from spilling into the public eye. And for those who were caught in his web, the cost of his betrayal was far greater than anyone had ever imagined. In the aftermath of these revelations, many of Diddy's closest friends and family members were left shocked and hurt. His former business partners, like the ones who helped build Bad Boy Records, began to question how much they really knew about him. Had they been part of a toxic, manipulative system without realizing it? Could they have stopped it? And more importantly, could they ever trust him again? One of Diddy's closest friends, who had worked alongside him for years, sat down for an exclusive interview. His face was grim, his eyes shadowed with regret. "I always thought Diddy was a genius, a visionary," he said, his voice cracking. "But now, I'm starting to wonder if I was just part of his game. He manipulated all of us, and we didn't see it. He made us think we were building an empire, but really we were just pawns in his play." This was the beginning of a tidal wave of stories from people who had once been loyal to him. Those who had worked closely with him in business ventures, those who had been part of his social circle, all began to speak out, some with anger, others with sorrow. Their stories echoed a common theme. Trust was broken, and the man they had once looked up to was no longer the person they thought he was, but the most painful betrayal came from within his own family. Diddy had always been a family man, proud of his children, his relationships with his mother, and his role as a father. But now his family was torn apart by the scandal. His children, some of whom were now old enough to understand the gravity of the situation, were left with questions they couldn't answer. How could their father, someone they had always looked up to, have lied so completely, so effortlessly? How could they reconcile the image they had of him with the man now being exposed? Diddy's oldest son, Justin, spoke out publicly, a rare moment of transparency for a man who had always kept his private life hidden. "I don't know who this person is anymore. This isn't the man who raised me. I'm devastated. We all are," Justin said, his voice shaking with emotion. "We've always known our father as this strong, powerful figure, but now we're starting to see things we can't unsee." The impact of this scandal went beyond the immediate family. Diddy's ex-partners, people who had once stood by him through thick and thin, now found themselves questioning their own loyalties. They had always known Diddy as a man who played the game at the highest level, but no one had expected the game to be played this way. One of Diddy's former business associates, who had helped him negotiate some of his biggest deals, was left speechless by the discovery. "I don't even know what to say," he admitted. "I've known him for years. We built this empire together, but I never imagined he could be capable of something like this. I don't know if I can ever look at him the same way again." The revelations didn't stop there. As the days went by, more and more evidence surfaced. Emails, audio recordings, and documents that painted a picture of a man who had used every tactic in the book to secure his power and influence. Mendici's DNA test had been only one of many pieces in the puzzle of lies and manipulation that Diddy had woven over the years. But now, the walls were closing in, and as the investigation continued, fans were left to grapple with the truth. Could the man they had admired for so long really be the villain he was being painted as? Or had the media twisted the story to fit their own agenda? The public was divided. Some believed in Diddy's innocence, while others saw this as the inevitable fall of a man who had been living a lie for far too long. The stage was set for the final act, and the world was waiting to see what Diddy would do next. Would he own up to his actions, take responsibility, and try to make amends? Or would he continue to deny the truth, fighting back with everything he had left? One thing was certain. The most shocking evidence against Diddy had already surfaced, and there was no turning back. This wasn't just a scandal. It was a story that would shape Diddy's legacy forever. As the trial loomed, the world watched in anticipation, waiting for the next move in a game that was far from over. The story had taken a life of its own. As the world digested the latest revelations about Diddy, new shocking details emerged, each one more explosive than the last. Every new piece of evidence seemed to open a new chapter in the scandal, one that threatened to unravel everything he had built. His empire, his reputation, his relationships, all of it was under siege. The public, once enamored by his charisma, was now questioning everything they had ever known about him. In the aftermath of the financial and personal betrayals exposed in the leaked documents, Diddy found himself facing an entirely new kind of pressure. He had been a master at controlling his image, at shaping the narrative to fit his desires. But now the truth was out there in full force, and there was no hiding from it. The world had seen his secrets, and there was no undoing the damage. One of the most shocking revelations came in the form of a series of emails that detailed the extent of Diddy's financial manipulation. These weren't just careless mistakes. These were deliberate, calculated moves designed to hide millions of dollars in transactions. The emails, which had been kept secret for years, outlined how Diddy had funneled money from various business ventures into offshore accounts, using a network of shell companies to cover his tracks. The money wasn't just disappearing, it was being siphoned off, hidden in plain sight. The figures were staggering. Millions of dollars moved through accounts in countries where Diddy's name was barely a whisper. It was clear that this wasn't a case of bad accounting. This was something far more sinister. These were calculated efforts to hide the true nature of his wealth, to keep his financial dealings out of the public eye. And now the truth was coming to light. One of Diddy's former colleagues spoke out on the condition of anonymity, revealing even more about the empire that Diddy had built. He was always a step ahead, the source said, their voice trembling with the weight of their words. Diddy knew how to make the right deals, to manipulate the right people. But it was all smoke and mirrors. The money was moving in ways we couldn't even understand. The whole thing was built on lies. The realization that Diddy had been living in this world of deception for so long left many of his associates stunned. People who had worked with him for years felt betrayed, not just by the financial misdeeds, but by the sheer scale of the lies. They had all been complicit in this facade, whether they knew it or not, but it wasn't just about the money. As more leaks surfaced, it became clear that Diddy's manipulation extended far beyond business deals and financial schemes. The next shocking piece of evidence came in the form of private conversations, text messages, and phone calls that revealed just how far Diddy was willing to go to control the people around him. The conversations, which were shared with the media, painted a chilling picture of a man who was willing to do whatever it took to stay on top. In one of the most disturbing exchanges, Diddy was heard discussing how to silence a person who had threatened to expose him. The text message sent to one of his trusted associates read, "We can't let this leak. Do what needs to be done. I won't be the one to fall from this." It wasn't just business that Diddy was willing to manipulate, it was his personal relationships as well. The messages revealed a side of him that fans had never seen, one that was ruthless and controlling, using his influence to keep people in check, to ensure that his image remained untarnished. But the most damning piece of evidence came from someone who had been close to him for years, his ex-girlfriend, whom he had once praised as his queen in public. In an exclusive interview, she revealed how Diddy had controlled every aspect of her life, from the personal to the professional. He wasn't who he said he was, she said, her voice filled with anger and betrayal. He had me believing that we were building something real, something that was gonna last. But it was all just an act. He used me, manipulated me, and when I started to question things, he shut me down. He's a master of control, and he'll stop at nothing to keep his empire intact. Her revelation sent shockwaves through the media. Diddy's personal life, once thought to be a private matter, was now under intense scrutiny. The woman who had once been by his side, supporting him through thick and thin, now found herself speaking out against him, revealing the darker side of their relationship. "I gave him everything," she continued. "But in return, I got nothing. No respect, no loyalty, just lies. He's a man who doesn't care about anyone but himself. The whole world thought he was this caring, generous mogul, but I know the truth. He'll do anything to keep his power, even if it means stepping on everyone around him." The world was beginning to see a different side of Diddy, one that was darker, more manipulative, and far less glamorous than the persona he had built. The more the evidence piled up, the clearer it became that Diddy was not the man he had projected himself to be. He had created an image of success, of generosity, of being a mentor to the next generation of artists. But now that image was shattering before the world's eyes. For his fans, the news was devastating. Diddy had been the one they looked up to, the one who had paved the way for hip-hop moguls. Now they were left to wonder if everything he had built was nothing but a house of cards, propped up by lies and deception. But there was one final bombshell that came just when everyone thought they had heard it all. A whistleblower who had worked closely with Diddy's inner circle came forward with more explosive revelations. This time, the allegations were even more shocking. According to the whistleblower, Diddy had used his influence to silence anyone who dared to challenge him. If you crossed him, he made sure you were out of the picture, the source claimed. People lost their careers, their reputations, their lives. Diddy controlled everything, and anyone who stepped out of line had to pay the price. The scale of Diddy's control was unprecedented. He wasn't just a businessman, he was a puppet master, pulling strings behind the scenes to ensure that his empire remained unchallenged. The extent of his manipulation had touched everyone in his orbit. Friends, colleagues, partners, and even his family. Now, as the walls closed in, Diddy was left with nothing but the wreckage of his past actions. His empire was crumbling, his relationships were shattered, and his reputation was in tatters. The man who had once been untouchable was now facing the consequences of his lies, his manipulation, and his refusal to ever let go of his need for control. And as the world watched, one question remained. Would Diddy ever be able to reclaim his legacy, or was this the end of the road for the once mighty mogul? The stage was set for the final act. The evidence had been laid bare, and Diddy's future was now uncertain. Would the truth truly set him free, or would it be the thing that finally brought him down? As the trial date loomed closer, the world was on the edge of its seat, watching every new development closely. The scandal surrounding Diddy had not only rocked his career, but also fractured the public's perception of him. His carefully crafted empire of music, mogul, businessman, and philanthropist was starting to look less like a legacy and more like a house of cards about to collapse. The public's trust, once unwavering, was now shattered, and the media frenzy surrounding the evidence against him seemed to grow by the hour. But Diddy wasn't ready to go down without a fight. In the quiet moments between his legal battles, he met with his closest advisors and a few remaining allies, hoping for a miracle. I didn't build this empire by letting people see me weak, Diddy said, his voice rough with frustration. But this is a setback, but it's not the end. I'm not going to let them take me down like this. But as the legal pressure mounted, Diddy found himself cornered, his back against the wall. His lawyers were doing their best to protect him, attempting to suppress the most damaging evidence. However, the public had already seen enough. Documents, audio recordings, and leaked emails had painted a damning portrait of the mogul. It wasn't just about the financial crimes, it was about the manipulation, the deceit, and the lengths he had gone to in order to maintain his image as the king of hip-hop. Diddy's once sterling reputation was now tainted by the very lies he had worked so hard to protect. The media, hungry for more dirt, began digging into every aspect of his personal life. And as they did, a dark picture began to emerge, one that went beyond business and into the personal. A series of text messages between Diddy and a former business partner surfaced, showing how Diddy had used intimidation to keep those around him in line. In one message, he said, "If they're not with me, they're against me. Make sure they understand that. They understand that." The shocking nature of these texts sent shockwaves through Diddy's inner circle. The once unshakable figure, the man who had made million-dollar deals with a smile, was now exposed as a calculating manipulator. The depth of his control over the people around him was staggering. It was no longer just about business transactions. It was about power, dominance, and using every tool at his disposal to ensure that no one dared to challenge him. As the trial date approached, Diddy's lawyer tried to strike a deal with the prosecution, hoping to avoid jail time for the mogul. But Erica's lawyer, who had been relentless from the start, refused to entertain any offers. There's no deal here. Not after everything that's come to light. Mendices may have been a part of the deception, but Diddy is the mastermind behind it all. He must pay for his actions, Erica's lawyer declared in a press conference, sending a clear message to Diddy's team. But Diddy wasn't just fighting for his reputation. He was fighting for his family, his children, his mother, his closest allies. They had all been dragged into the drama. His eldest son, Justin, had already spoken out publicly about the pain he felt over his father's actions. "I never thought I'd see this day," Justin said in an interview. "I looked up to him my whole life. He's always been the one to show me how to succeed. but now everything feels like a lie. It's hard to look at him the same way. For Diddy, hearing his son speak those words was a wake-up call. The man who had always been in control, who had built his empire from nothing, was now facing the truth of his actions. "I didn't want to hurt them," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper as he sat alone in his office one night. But I've hurt everyone who's ever believed in me, and now I have to face it." Despite the mounting pressure, Diddy continued to try to maintain control of the situation. He released statements denying the allegations, calling them a smear campaign and a calculated attempt to bring him down. But the more he denied it, the more the evidence piled up. It wasn't just about what was in the records. It was about the people who had been affected by his actions. The artists he had manipulated, the business partners he had used, and of course the family he had betrayed. As the media began to piece together the full story, the magnitude of the scandal became even clearer. Diddy's manipulation wasn't confined to business deals. He had used his influence to silence anyone who dared to challenge him. Former employees came forward with shocking stories of being intimidated into silence, of being forced to keep quiet about Diddy's dealings or risk losing their careers. One former artist who had worked with Diddy for years spoke out about how Diddy had pressured him to sign away the rights to his music under duress. Diddy didn't give us a choice. The artist explained, "He made it clear, either you sign the deal or you're out." There was no room for negotiation. He's not just a businessman, he's a dictator. He controls everything, and if you cross him, you pay the price. These revelations painted Diddy in a light that no one had seen before. The man who had once been celebrated as a visionary, a trailblazer for black entrepreneurs, was now being exposed as someone who used fear and manipulation to maintain his empire. The more the public learned about the lengths he had gone to, the more disillusioned they became. Fans who had once idolized him were now questioning everything. Was he really the mentor he had claimed to be? Or was he just another mogul who used people to build his wealth, discarding them when they were no longer useful? As the trial continued, Diddy's legal team became more desperate. They pushed for a settlement, offering a significant payout in exchange for a lesser sentence. But Erica's lawyer was unwavering. "We're not here for the money, we're here for justice," Erica's lawyer stated in a press conference. Diddy needs to answer for his actions. He's hurt so many people, and now it's time for him to face the consequences. The final week of the trial arrived, and the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Diddy, sitting in the defendant's chair, was a shell of the man he had once been. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by a nervous energy. He had spent his entire career being untouchable, but now the walls were closing in. Every new piece of evidence, every new witness seemed to drive the nail deeper into his coffin. But as the final arguments were made, Diddy's team pulled. Out of surprise, an exclusive interview with a former associate who had worked with Erica's lawyer. The associate claimed that the evidence against Diddy had been fabricated, and that the entire scandal was a setup designed to ruin his career. The bombshell allegations sent shockwaves through the courtroom, and the media immediately seized on the story. Was this the breakthrough Diddy had been waiting for, or was it another desperate attempt to turn the tide in his favor? As the court session ended, the judge declared a recess. The fate of Diddy was now in the hands of the jury, and the world was left wondering, would Diddy finally pay the price for his actions, or would he once again find a way to escape the truth? The tension in the courtroom was at an all-time high as the jury began its deliberations. Diddy, seated quietly with his legal team, knew that the fate of his entire career, and possibly his freedom, was now in the hands of 12 strangers. The days of being able to control the narrative were over. The media had already latched onto the story, and no matter the verdict, Diddy's public image had already been irrevocably tarnished. Erica, on the other hand, stood strong as the trial wound down. Every emotion she had been holding in for months was now on full display. Anger, hurt, and a deep, aching sense of betrayal. She had been through the storm, and while the legal outcome remained uncertain, she had already decided that her future wouldn't be shaped by the man who had caused her so much pain. She had found her strength in the face of scandal, and regardless of how the trial ended, Erica was determined to reclaim her life. As the days passed in the courthouse, whispers continued to swirl about what the jury might decide. Diddy's defense had made a valiant effort to downplay the gravity of the situation. claiming that the allegations were part of a personal vendetta, a smear campaign orchestrated to bring him down. But the evidence against him, the financial documents, the secret conversations, the tampered DNA test, was damning. No matter how hard his team tried to paint him as a victim, the truth was undeniable. And then, just as it seemed like the case might drag on longer than anyone anticipated, the jury returned with their verdict. The courtroom held its collective breath. Diddy sat, his face stoic, but his fingers nervously tapping against the armrest. This was it! The judge cleared her throat, signaling the beginning of the end. The jury foreman stood, holding the verdict in his hand, and looked directly at Diddy. "Guilty," the foreman said simply, his voice echoing through the tense silence. "On all counts." The words hit like a thunderclap. The courtroom seemed to freeze, and for a moment it felt as if time itself had stopped. Diddy's body went rigid, his face pale. This wasn't supposed to happen. He had done everything to avoid this moment. Yet here it was, staring him in the face. Erica, though stunned, didn't allow herself to show the raw emotion that was bubbling inside her. She had fought for this, fought for the truth to come to light. But even in victory, the taste was bitter. The man she had once trusted had been exposed for his deceit and betrayal. The damage was done, and while the legal victory was a small step toward justice, the emotional toll was far greater. As the judge announced the details of Diddy's sentencing, it became clear that the consequences were severe. He would face a significant fine, community service, and most shockingly, probation. The weight of the law had come down on him, but the punishment didn't stop there. Diddy's empire was crumbling. His businesses, once thriving, were now under intense scrutiny. Partnerships were being severed. Investors were pulling out. The fallout was far-reaching. Diddy had always been the one in control, the one pulling the strings behind the scenes. But now, he was a puppet in a game that was no longer his to play. The media was relentless. "Diddy guilty, the fall of a mogul," screamed the headlines. Social media exploded with reactions, some supporting him, others condemning him. "How could he do this to his family?" one tweet read. "He lied to everyone, and now he has to pay the price," another user posted. The public, once obsessed with his every move, was now divided, and Diddy's status as a hip-hop icon was forever altered. Meanwhile, Mendices, who had watched from the sidelines, now found himself grappling with his own demons. The connection between the two men, once built on mutual respect and shared experiences, was now fractured. The trial and its consequences had shone a harsh light on everything they had in common. Both men were trapped by their lies, and both were now facing the consequences of their actions. Mendices, who had once been a part of Diddy's world, now found himself reevaluating everything he had ever known about the man he had once admired. In a private conversation, Mendices couldn't help but reflect on the parallels between his own mistakes and Diddy's fall from grace. "We all think we can get away with it," Mendices said quietly, "but we can't. The truth always comes out." And yet, even as Diddy faced the consequences of his actions, a small part of him refused to accept defeat. The press conferences were over, but the fight wasn't. He knew there was still a way to salvage his empire, still a chance to rebuild his legacy. The question was, how? Could he find a way to repair the damage, or had the truth irreparably broken the foundation of everything he had worked for? Days turned into weeks, and the media continued to cover the fallout. Diddy's social media presence, once filled with lavish posts about his success and luxury lifestyle, was now eerily quiet. He had retreated from the public eye, his silence only adding fuel to the fire. His fans, those who had once rallied behind him, now found themselves questioning everything they'd ever believed about the mogul. But amidst the chaos, a new chapter began to emerge. Diddy's inner circle, the people who had helped him build his empire, started to speak out. The first to break their silence was a former business partner who had been with Diddy through thick and thin. "I thought we were in this together," the former partner said in an exclusive interview. But in the end, Diddy showed us all that he was willing to throw anyone under the bus to save himself. "I'm done. It's over." The revelation sent shockwaves through the industry. If Diddy's closest allies were turning on him, then his entire empire was in jeopardy. The sense of betrayal was palpable. Those who had once defended him were now calling him out for his actions. He's not the man we thought he was," one former associate said. "He used us, lied to us, and now he's paying the price for it." Diddy had built his empire on loyalty. Loyalty to his friends, his business partners, and his fans, but now it seemed that loyalty was being returned with contempt. His empire was unraveling, and with every new revelation, the damage grew. As the days passed and the fallout continued, Diddy was left with a sobering realization. The truth had come at a steep price. The relationships he had worked so hard to build were now fractured beyond repair, and the public, once enamored with his every move, had turned their backs on him. The question now was whether Diddy could ever rebuild, whether he could ever find redemption after everything that had happened, or was this the final chapter in his storied career? The legal consequences had been settled, but the real battle, the battle for his reputation, was far from over. Would Diddy ever be able to return to the man he once was? Or had the truth shattered his life beyond repair? As the months passed, the fallout from Diddy's scandal showed no sign of abating. The public's perception of him had changed permanently. Fans who had once idolized him now questioned everything they thought they knew about the man behind the music and the mogul. His empire, once an untouchable force in the entertainment world, was starting to crumble under the weight of his own lies. Diddy was now a shadow of the person he had been before the scandal, and no amount of PR could fix the damage done. Behind closed doors, Diddy's legal team was still fighting tooth and nail to salvage whatever they could. Plea deals had been offered, but with the media already having turned against him, they knew there was only so much they could do. His business ventures, once thriving, were now struggling to stay afloat. He had lost partnerships, investors, and even sponsorships, all of whom had once backed him based on his image as a successful and reliable mogul. Now, no one seemed willing to touch him, but perhaps the most painful blow came when Diddy's family began to distance themselves from him. His children, who had once been the apple of his eye, were now caught in the middle of the mess. They had to endure the public fallout, the whispers, the media scrutiny, and worst of all, the public judgment of their father. His daughter, who had always been his little princess, was photographed crying on a rare outing, her face etched with confusion and hurt. "I don't understand what happened," she said in a quiet interview after the paparazzi caught the moment. "I don't know why people are saying these things about my dad. He's always been there for me." Her voice cracked with emotion, a deep pain in her eyes that only those closest to the situation could truly understand. The once admired father figure was now a man whose legacy was marred by betrayal, lies, and deception. But even as his family struggled with the scandal, there was one person who still held on to hope: his ex-girlfriend, the one who had once been the most important woman in his life. She too had been dragged into the media firestorm, forced to answer questions about their past relationship. And as much as she tried to distance herself from the chaos, the pain of seeing the man she had once loved unraveling in front of the world was too much to ignore. "I never thought he was capable of something like this," she confessed in an emotional interview. "He always told me that he wanted to build something real, something that would last. But now I see that it was all a lie. It was all for show. And I'm left wondering who he really is." Diddy had built his entire life around an image of success and perfection, but now that image was shattered. The trust he had worked so hard to cultivate over the years was gone. The friendships, the partnerships, the family bonds, everything had been tainted by the lies he had told, the lives he had manipulated, and the power he had wielded to protect his empire. And yet, despite everything, Diddy was still fighting. He couldn't let go of the idea that he could rise from the ashes, that he could rebuild. His ego, bruised but unbroken, pushed him to keep trying. There were meetings with potential investors who were willing to give him a second chance. Few people still believed in his ability to turn things around, to regain his status as a mogul. But the question remained, could he ever be the man he once was? Or was this the beginning of the end for Diddy? One night, as Diddy sat alone in his luxurious but now empty mansion, he reflected on the life he had built and the life he had destroyed. The silence was deafening. He had once filled his home with parties, music, and laughter. Now it was just him and his thoughts. The weight of the scandal, the guilt, the public judgment, and the personal betrayal were starting to take their toll. He had fought so hard to control his narrative, but now it seemed like everything was slipping through his fingers. "I used to be untouchable," Diddy muttered to himself, staring out at the city skyline. "I used to have everything, but now, I don't know who I am anymore. I don't even recognize myself." For Diddy, the battle for redemption wasn't just about rebuilding his empire. It was about facing the person he had become and trying to make amends for the damage he had done. The path to redemption wasn't clear, and it seemed like every step forward was met with even more obstacles. As the media continued to scrutinize every move he made, Diddy tried to take control of the narrative. He made public apologies, took responsibility for his actions, and even started a new project meant to rebuild his image. He was trying to shift the public's perception of him from a manipulative mogul to a man who had learned from his mistakes. But the more he tried, the more it felt like he was fighting an uphill battle. People don't just forgive and forget, Diddy admitted in a rare moment of vulnerability during an interview. "I've hurt a lot of people, and I've got to live with that. I don't expect anyone to just let me off the hook, but I'm trying to be better. I'm trying to fix the things I broke." But the public's response was mixed. Some people believed in second chances, in the idea that people could change, that redemption was possible. Others, however, were less forgiving. "Once a liar, always a liar," one fan posted on social media. Diddy had his chance and he blew it. He can't fix what he's done. The stark divide in opinions was a reflection of the larger issue at hand: trust. Could Diddy ever regain the trust of his fans, his family, and those closest to him? Or had he burned too many bridges to ever come back from this? As the weeks turned into months, Diddy's future remained uncertain. He continued to fight to restore his empire, but it was clear that the road ahead would be long and difficult. The damage he had caused could not be undone overnight, and no amount of money or fame could repair the broken relationships that had once been so strong. For Diddy, the story wasn't just about his career, it was about his legacy. And as the final chapter of his saga began to unfold, one question remained: would Diddy be able to redeem himself? Or was this the end of his reign as the hip-hop mogul he had once been? The trial may have ended, but the aftermath of Diddy's scandal is far from over. The mogul, who once ruled the music industry with an iron fist, now finds himself in the most precarious position of his life. The lies, the manipulation, the deceit, it all caught up with him in ways no one could have predicted. Diddy's empire, once built on power and respect, is now a fragile house of cards, shaken to its core. The damage done to his career, his reputation, and his family may never be fully repaired. But the story doesn't end here. The world is watching, waiting to see if Diddy will rise from the ashes or if the consequences of his actions will permanently tarnish his legacy. Can he rebuild? Can he win back the trust of his fans, his family, and those who have supported him for so long? Or is this the end of the road for the man who once seemed untouchable? For Erica, the road ahead is clearer. Justice has been served, but the scars of betrayal run deep. She's taken the first steps toward healing, but how do you heal when the person you trusted the most is the one who hurt you? Can she ever truly forgive him, or has the damage been done? One thing is certain, the truth always comes out, and for Diddy, there's no escaping the fallout. What will happen next? Will Diddy be able to redeem himself, or will his empire crumble? And for Erica, will the pain of betrayal ever truly heal? We want to hear your thoughts. Do you think Diddy can make a comeback? Is redemption possible for him? Or is it too late? Comment below with your opinions, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more explosive stories just like this one. You don't want to miss what happens next in this unfolding saga.